So with me not being as interested in the Galaxy S9, I guess there's a new contender for premium Android phone, and with the look of these new Huawei P20s, I'm very curious and excited to see how these two new smartphones fare in today's world. So these have some pretty premium specs when you take a look at them. The Huawei P20 comes in two sizes. One is a 6.1-inch OLED display, while one is a 5.8-inch LCD display. So one of them directly the same size of an iPhone 10, and one of them as large as the rumored LCD model iPhone coming out later this year. Huawei seems to have mad respect for Apple because a lot of what Huawei does appears to be things that Apple's okay with. Both of these phones have notches. They've acknowledged that in order to have the most amount of screen on your phone, you just have a little cutout at the top for the cameras, and then the rest you can fill with display, which I appreciate. I enjoy that on my iPhone 10. Huawei also respects that. Huawei also does not believe in keeping around the headphone jack. They want you to move to a new standard, which is either wireless or just using USB-C, which is the charge port on both of these. The other thing Huawei believes in is including a very filling package when you buy a Huawei phone. You're getting USB-C headphones. See, Google, just because you don't have a headphone jack, it doesn't mean you don't have to include headphones with the purchase of a phone. But on top of that, they also include a USB-C to headphone jack adapter. On top of that, they even include a protective case, which is very friendly of Huawei. The other thing Huawei appreciates from Apple is the placement of the fingerprint reader. They do not believe in having it slapped on the back and having you reach around for the proper placement. Huawei thinks that should go on the front of the phone, which Apple does too, as Apple puts Touch ID on the front of 75% of their current lineup. iPhone SE, iPhone 8, and 8 Plus all put Touch ID on the front, where I personally think it belongs. It especially belongs there if you're going to have wireless charging on the phone, because that means if you set the phone down on a Qi charge mat, on a Qi stand, you shouldn't have to pick up the phone to unlock it. Huawei acknowledges this. The other reason I appreciate this is they're going for a semi-bezel-less display. Obviously, the chin is very noticeable at the bottom, but as we've seen with all Android phones, and recently, the CEO of OnePlus officially confirmed that there will be a notch on the OnePlus 6. All these Android companies, aside from Samsung, are deciding to go through with the notch, but they all have to have this giant chin at the bottom. For those of you who don't know, this is because every display panel has to be attached via a ribbon at the bottom of the screen. This ribbon needs to be attached to the circuit board, and the only reason that the iPhone 10 is able to not have a notch is because the OLED panel in the iPhone 10 actually curves around and the ribbon is on the back. This allows for the bezel to be the same side all the way around. Other Android companies don't do this because manufacturing it is very expensive. It's very luxurious looking, but it costs a lot of money, so in order to be cheap, they include the chin. Now, Huawei, I think, made a really smart decision with the P20 by saying, yes, we have a chin, but the chin is not useless. On all these other Android phones, it's just there and you have on-screen buttons. Huawei was smart and said, if we're gonna have a chin, we might as well put Touch ID there. I'm kind of surprised not more Android companies have gone forward with this. Everyone's just very quick to say, put the fingerprint reader on the back. That's where it goes, even though they got this big old chin on the front. Not that fingerprint readers matter to me very much because I can't use them anyway. Watch the S9 review to find out why. It's basically just psoriasis. But on top of that, I still think that Huawei got it right. That's where fingerprint readers should go. But that's not really what people are talking about when they're talking about the Huawei P20. Everyone wants to talk about the cameras. And boy, so do I. The Huawei P20 Pro, the 6.1-inch OLED version, is special because it's one of the first smartphone cameras to implement a triple lens setup on the back. We have two cameras conjoined and then one kind of off to the side. I'm not really sure why they put it up in that way. I don't know why they wanted to do a two combined and then one separate. Why not just make it like a stoplight? I don't know, but here's what the lenses do. You have one 40 megapixel wide angle lens, which for many of you who don't know, megapixels being higher doesn't necessarily mean the image is more crisp, but there is a lot more data for the computer to work with. 40 megapixels can mean that it's not as good in low light situations, but the second lens helps with that by being a monochrome lens. This is a 20 megapixel lens that doesn't focus on any color. This whole lens purpose is to just find the true darks and the true brights and just find the overall detail in the image, and then they merge that with the wide angle lens that's focusing more on capturing a large image with the color. And overall, based on the pictures that they've provided, it does look pretty good. On top of that, you have that third lens, which is the telephoto option. Just like an iPhone, it allows you to zoom in, and this lens is an 8 megapixel lens, so not as much detail, but it's giving you a lot more detail than just a standard zoom in would be. And I think this is a very interesting setup because as we've seen with smartphones in the past, past, having a ton of megapixels does not necessarily make the image better. But the monochrome and the telephoto help compensate for those issues of having a 40 megapixel sensor. And if you care about DxOMark scores, this apparently makes incredibly crisp images, scoring the record high mobile score of 109. Now let me just talk about DxOMark real quick. Personally, I think photography, videography, that is all subjective. I don't personally believe DxOMark takes into consideration all things when reviewing smartphone cameras. Like, they never take into effect that iPhones can do 4K at 60. By the way, the P20 cannot do that. The CPU is too slow. They can't do 4K at 60, even though other Android phones like the S9 can, even for a short period of time, whereas the iPhone 10 can do it unlimited. And I personally think DxOMark is more about photography, because back when I vlogged over on Tailosive Talks with the Galaxy S9, everyone in the comments hated it. My editor even was pointing out that, yeah, the S9 did look noticeably worse for video compared to my iPhone 10. So again, I don't think the scores should matter too much. The reason I want to bring DxOMark into this is because of the Pixel. The whole reason DxOMark has any form of credibility, the only reason we care about them, is really just because when Google unveiled the Pixel, they referred everyone to them. How good is our camera? Go check out these highly appreciated camera reviewers. They gave our smartphone the highest review ever. You should trust them. They're smart guys, they're photographers, they know what they're talking about. You guys go check them out and see that our phone is the highest score. Same thing happened with the Pixel 2. They got the score of 98, and then 4 months later, it was topped by the Galaxy S9 Plus, a phone with a dual camera that got a score of 99. I don't really think it has a better camera, to be honest, after looking at the pictures I took, but they probably just appreciate the variable aperture and stuff like that. I didn't really notice any real world difference in my review, but it's just funny to me that Google partners with DxOMark, pays them to work on their camera, and then just a few months later says, nope, this phone's better. On an unrelated note, S9 Plus is still cheaper. But now the Huawei P20s enter the line, and with the P20 Pro, we have a score of 109, a whole 11 points higher than the Pixel 2. And that's not the end of it. The smaller 5.8-inch Huawei phone, the P20, is technically a downsize because you only have 2 cameras. That scored a 102. That is the second highest phone they've reviewed. And the funniest thing about this is Google, when unveiling the Pixel 2, said dual camera, no need. Why do you need a dual camera? Machine learning, that can fix all that. Cut to today, and now not 1, not 2, but 3 smartphones with dual cameras at minimum outscore the Pixel 2 with its single lens setup. And I've argued with people on Twitter about this already, saying that, well, the Pixel 2 didn't need 2 cameras at the time. It's like, right, because your phone's only supposed to be the best for a couple months, right? And then all your Android competition steals it. That'll make Pixel buyers feel good. I just can't wait to see Google with the Pixel 3 go, and because we didn't want to stop there, we went ahead and added a dual camera, which we said we didn't need one. We said that, but then everyone beat us. Now I'm getting off track here, just talking about Google and DxOMark. I just think that's hilarious. But if we're just talking about the Huawei P20s, I'm very interested in trying out this Android phone. It seems like a company that has mad respect for Apple and wants to create a premium experience. Huawei is one of the most popular manufacturing brands in the world, but it's actually for more budget phones. Huawei makes a lot of phones, but it's usually not the expensive ones that do really well, and that's a point I haven't got into yet, the pricing. The first sad bit of news is the Huawei P20 will not be sold in the US, which is a big bummer for people like me, and I'm sure a lot of my viewers out there. We can't buy it here, or if you can find a way to buy it, it's gonna be kind of tricky, and it likely won't work with US carriers. But for countries like China and most of Europe, you're gonna be able to buy it for the equivalent of $1,100 US. This is not a cheap phone. Technically, for us in the US, the Huawei P20 Pro has a higher starting price than the iPhone 10, which was already a really expensive phone at $999. But as many people have pointed out, and I appreciate people correcting me on this, because I think when we're in the US, it's very easy for us to forget that there are huge markets overseas, and we need to acknowledge what you guys are gonna get and talk about what features you guys have compared to us. The important thing to remember is that the iPhone 10 is not the same price in other countries. In fact, in most of Europe, the iPhone 10 is more of a US dollar equivalent to $1,200 because of import tariffs. This is not Apple's fault. This is those different countries saying that this is a product competing with our local brands, which means we have to make the competition a bit more fair and charge more for importing iPhones into our country. That's why the iPhone 10 costs $200 more, sometimes $100 to even $400 more, depending on where you are in the world. And that means that the Huawei P20 Pro actually pretty evenly priced with an iPhone 10. Sometimes costing more, but for a lot of countries, it actually costs a little bit less than an iPhone 10. And even with that expensive price point, very expensive for people in like Australia, lots of people still buy buy the iPhone 10. What's going to be interesting though is to find out if people have the same kind of loyalty to Huawei and all of these reports saying that the P20 is this great phone with a great camera, great features. Are people going to be willing to spend $1,100 in those different countries? I think the main reason a lot of people are okay with spending just absurd amounts of money on iPhones in different countries is just because they have that ecosystem, they like iOS, they don't want to leave that. Huawei is primarily known for selling lots of budget-friendly phones. So when Huawei starts pushing the limits and starts making even more expensive phones, I'm curious to see if those hardcore Huawei fans will be okay with suddenly not buying budget phones anymore and start spending the amount of money one would spend on an iPhone on something on Android. Now that we have the Huawei P20 and P20 Pro, we have these premium features, but they're not coming from Apple. So I'm very curious to see how it's going to perform. Obviously, the fact that it can't be sold in the US is going to be a significant limitation in the Huawei sales because you gotta admit the US is a huge market. A lot of people are here, a lot of people spend a lot of money on phones here, and not having that means that Huawei P20 is probably never going to sell as well as regular phones that can be sold in any country for any price. But regardless, I still think it's a very impressive Android smartphone. I like the way they built it. It comes in beautiful colors, and it's showing that what Apple does with the iPhone sets the standard for the rest of the market. No headphone jack is standard now. Notches are becoming standard. Wireless charging, dual camera setups. And on top of this, that means that all the people who bought the Pixel 2 and said that dual cameras are just a gimmick, you only need one camera to do everything, you don't need more cameras, proves that Google does not know how to set the standard. Proves that Google is, if anything, always behind, always not understanding what's gonna happen next. Just like how they mocked Apple for removing the headphone jack, and then they did it themselves. Then they brought up in marketing that, where's the dual camera? Haha, you don't need one. And now I'm fairly confident that this year they're going to be adding one. If they expect to get that highest ranking score in DxOMark, which will be really tricky for them, again, doesn't matter. Photography, videography is subjective. I don't think DxOMark takes these things into consideration. It's just that Google was the primary endorsement of this company, so to have them be destroyed by other companies is just funny. But between the Pixel 1 and the Pixel 2, they improved 9 points. They went from 89 to 98. Now with the P20 Pro, they're already 11 points ahead of the Pixel 2. Can the Pixel 3 score an extra 12 and become on top? And if they do, how long will it be before Huawei or Samsung makes a different phone that'll top them out? Regardless, I think it's safe to say that single lens setups are not going to be the new trend. If anything, we're going to see a couple more smartphones with 3 lens setups, because now we're seeing that companies like DxOMark really appreciate that, and that means it's good for marketing. You can tell people you have the highest rated smartphone camera, and Google can't say that. So let me know your thoughts on the Huawei P20 and the P20 Pro. I think they're very fascinating, and I have mad respect for Huawei for making them the way they did. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.